The dust swirled across the parched Montana street as Sarah O'Malley clutched her son to her chest and darted between buildings, her heart pounding against her ribs like a frantic bird trying to escape its cage. Whispers followed her through the frontier town of Silveridge, and she knew her time here was running short. 4-year-old Thomas clung to her skirts, his innocent eyes wide with confusion as they hurried toward the stagecoach office. It was 1875, and the West was no place for a woman alone with a child and secrets as heavy as the mountains that surrounded them. Sarah had been planning this escape for months, saving every penny from her work at the town's only hotel. The stagecoach to Denver would depart in less than an hour, and from there, she could disappear into the growing city where no one would know her past or question a widow raising a child alone. "Mama, why are we running?" Thomas whispered, his small voice nearly lost in the bustle of the dusty Main Street. "We're going on an adventure, my love," Sarah replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins, and she tucked it behind her ear with a trembling hand. "Remember how I told you about the big city? We're going there today." The boy nodded solemnly, clutching the small wooden horse that was his only toy. Sarah felt a pang of guilt. Thomas deserved more than a life of constant movement and fear, but she had no choice. Not since Jericho Blackburn had discovered where they were hiding and sent his men to find them. The stagecoach office was mercifully quiet when they arrived. Sarah approached the ticket counter, counting out the dollars she'd saved. "1 adult and 1 child to Denver, please," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The clerk, an older man with spectacles perched on his nose, counted her money twice before sliding 2 tickets across the counter. "Stage leaves in 40 minutes, madam. You can wait inside if you'd like." Sarah nodded gratefully and led Thomas to a bench in the corner. From her position, she could see the street through the window, watching for any sign of trouble. Thomas leaned against her, his small body warm against her side. She stroked his dark hair, so like his father's, and wondered if she would ever stop running. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Sarah's eyes darted to the clock on the wall, then back to the street. 20 minutes until departure. She allowed herself to breathe a little easier. Perhaps they would make it this time. Then she saw him. Dust-covered boots. A tall, imposing figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. A man dismounting from a chestnut stallion directly in front of the stagecoach office. The wide-brimmed hat couldn't hide the sharp blue eyes that scanned the street with purpose. Sarah's heart stuttered in her chest. She didn't recognize him, but she recognized the look a hunter tracking his prey. Blackburn must have hired a new man, someone she wouldn't know to avoid. "Thomas," she whispered urgently, "we need to go. Now." She scooped up their small bag and took her son's hand, heading for the back door she'd spotted earlier. They slipped out into the alley behind the building just as the front door swung open. The alley was narrow and smelled of refuse, but Sarah didn't care. She pulled Thomas along, searching for an escape route. The stables they could hide there until the stranger left, then make their way back for the stagecoach. They had almost reached the end of the alley when a deep voice called out behind them. "Mrs. O'Malley." Sarah froze, then slowly turned, pushing Thomas behind her skirts. The man stood at the mouth of the alley, his tall frame blocking most of the light. She could see him more clearly now, broad shoulders, a strong jaw dusted with stubble, and those penetrating blue eyes. He wasn't one of Blackburn's usual hired guns. This man looked different, steadier, more assured. "I don't know who you're looking for," Sarah lied, her voice surprisingly calm despite the fear coursing through her veins. "My name is Wilson. Mrs. Wilson." The man took a step forward, and Sarah took a corresponding step back. His eyes flickered to where Thomas peeked out from behind her skirts. "My name is Daniel Thornton," he said, his voice low and unexpectedly gentle. "And I believe you are Sarah O'Malley. I'm not here to harm you or your boy." "Then what do you want?" Sarah demanded, her hand tightening around Thomas's. Daniel Thornton removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair. The gesture was respectful, almost old-fashioned, but Sarah wasn't fooled. Men like Blackburn could hire wolves who knew how to act like gentlemen. "I've been looking for you for quite some time, Mrs. O'Malley," he said. "Not for the reasons you might think. I need to speak with you about your late husband." A cold feeling washed over Sarah. "My husband has been dead for 4 years. There's nothing to discuss." Daniel's eyes softened with something that looked like compassion. "I'm afraid there is, and it's urgent." He glanced down the alley. "But this isn't the place. Please let me buy you and your son a meal. We can talk somewhere safe." "Nowhere is safe," Sarah replied bitterly. A shout from the street made them both turn. 2 rough-looking men were questioning the stagecoach driver, showing him a piece of paper likely a drawing of Sarah. Daniel noticed her panic. "Those men, are they looking for you?" Sarah didn't answer, but her face must have betrayed her fear. "Come with me," Daniel said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My horse is behind the livery. We can be out of town before they know you're gone." "Why should I trust you?" Sarah whispered fiercely. "Because right now I'm your only chance," he replied simply. "And because I knew Patrick O'Malley. I owe him my life, and I promised him I'd find you if anything happened to him." Sarah stared at him, searching for deceit in those blue eyes and finding none. Her husband had never mentioned a Daniel Thornton, but Patrick had kept many secrets. That much she knew all too well. "Mama." Thomas tugged at her skirt, his eyes wide with worry. "Are those the bad men again?" Sarah knelt down to her son's level. "We're going to go with this man for a little while," she said, praying she wasn't making a terrible mistake. "But you stay right beside me, do you understand?" Thomas nodded solemnly, clutching his wooden horse tighter. Sarah stood and faced Daniel. "If this is a trick, if you're working for Blackburn, I'm not," Daniel cut her off firmly. "Jericho Blackburn is the reason I'm here. But we need to move now." With no other options, Sarah nodded once. Daniel led them deeper into the alley, away from the main street where Blackburn's men were searching. They skirted around buildings, keeping to the shadows until they reached the back of the livery. Daniel's chestnut stallion stood waiting, along with a pack horse loaded with supplies. He quickly untied them both and led them further behind the building. "I have a place about 10 miles from here," he explained in a low voice. "We can talk safely there." Sarah hesitated, looking at the horses. Thomas has never ridden before. Daniel knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. For the first time, Thomas didn't shrink away but instead regarded the stranger with curious eyes. "What's your horse's name?" Thomas asked tentatively. "This is Copper," Daniel replied with a gentle smile, "and he's the best horse in the territory. Would you like to ride with me?" Thomas looked up at his mother questioningly. Sarah was struck by how naturally Daniel had addressed her son, not with condescension or false cheerfulness, but with simple respect. "We'll both ride with you," Sarah decided, not willing to be separated from Thomas. Daniel nodded and lifted Thomas onto the saddle with ease. The boy's eyes widened with wonder as he sat atop the magnificent animal. Daniel secured their small bag to the pack horse, then mounted behind Thomas, extending his hand to Sarah. She took it reluctantly, feeling the strength in his calloused grip as he pulled her up behind him. The horse shifted under their combined weight, but seemed unfazed. "Hold on tight to the saddle horn, Thomas," Daniel instructed. "Mrs. O'Malley, you'll need to hold on to me." Sarah hesitantly placed her hands on Daniel's sides, feeling the solid warmth of him through his worn cotton shirt. It had been years since she'd been this close to a man, and the intimacy of it, even in these dire circumstances, made her uncomfortable. "Ready?" Daniel asked, glancing over his shoulder. Sarah nodded, tightening her grip as Daniel urged the horse forward. They moved at a walk until they reached the edge of town, then broke into a canter once they hit the open trail. Sarah clutched Daniel's waist, her fear of falling momentarily overshadowing her fear of the man himself. Thomas let out a delighted laugh as the wind rushed past them, and despite everything, Sarah felt a small smile tug at her lips. Her son had so few moments of pure joy. They rode for nearly an hour, leaving the main trail for a narrower path that wound through pine-covered hills. Eventually, a small cabin came into view, nestled in a clearing with a backdrop of mountains. A corral stood empty beside it, and a small stream gurgled nearby. Daniel slowed Copper to a walk as they approached. "It's not much," he said, "but it's safe. No one knows about this place except me." He dismounted first, then lifted Thomas down before offering his hand to Sarah. She ignored it, sliding down from the horse on her own, wincing as her feet hit the ground. The long ride had left her stiff and sore. Thomas, on the other hand, seemed energized by the adventure. "Mama, did you see how fast we were going? It was like flying." "I saw," Sarah replied, smoothing his hair. She turned to Daniel, who was removing the saddle from Copper. "You said we needed to talk about my husband." Daniel nodded, his expression turning serious. "Let me tend to the horses first. There's water from the stream inside if you're thirsty, and some food in the cupboard. Make yourselves comfortable." Sarah hesitated, then took Thomas by the hand and approached the cabin. It was simple but sturdy, with a covered porch and solid wooden door. Inside, she found a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, and a small cupboard. Everything was neat and orderly, speaking of a man who lived simply but carefully. She found a pitcher of water as promised and poured some for Thomas, who drank eagerly. The ride had left them both dusty and tired. "Mama, is this our new home?" Thomas asked, exploring the small space with curious eyes. "No, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her heart aching at his innocent question. "We're just visiting for a little while." The door opened and Daniel entered, ducking his head slightly under the doorframe. He removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I can make something simple." Sarah shook her head. "I want to know why we're here." "What about my husband?" Daniel sighed and gestured to the table. "Please sit." Sarah complied, pulling Thomas onto her lap. The boy was beginning to droop with exhaustion from their eventful day. Daniel sat across from them, his large frame making the small chair look almost comical. Up close, Sarah could see the fine lines around his eyes and the small scar that cut through his right eyebrow. He was older than she had initially thought, perhaps in his early 30s, a few years older than she was. "I served with Patrick in the war," Daniel began. "We were in the same Union regiment, fought side by side at Gettysburg and after. He saved my life at Cold Harbor when I took a Confederate bullet, carried me 2 miles to a field hospital." Sarah listened carefully, looking for any sign of deception. Patrick had rarely spoken of the war, but she knew he'd fought for the Union. "After the war, we went our separate ways," Daniel continued. "He headed west, and I stayed in Pennsylvania for a time. We corresponded occasionally. Then, about 5 years ago, he wrote to me, asking for help. He said he'd gotten involved with some dangerous men and needed to get out. By the time I made it out here, he was already dead." Sarah's arms tightened around Thomas, who had fallen asleep against her chest. "Patrick died in a mining accident," she said flatly. "A tunnel collapse." Daniel's blue eyes held her steadily. Is that what you believe or what you were told? A cold feeling spread through Sarah's chest. What are you saying? The tunnel collapse was no accident, Mrs. O'Malley. Patrick was murdered, and I believe Jericho Blackburn ordered it. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, pain and old suspicions washing over her. Why are you telling me this now? It's been 4 years. Because Blackburn is finally getting what he deserves, Daniel replied, leaning forward. The federal marshal has been building a case against him for years: fraud, extortion, murder. They're close to an indictment, but they need witnesses. Sarah shook her head vehemently. No, absolutely not. I've spent 4 years running from that man, keeping my son safe. I'm not putting Thomas in danger by testifying. You're already in danger, Daniel pointed out gently. Those men in town weren't the first he sent after you, were they? Sarah didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. The difference now is that you have a chance to end it, Daniel continued. To stop running. Blackburn is powerful, but he's not above the law. With your testimony about what Patrick told you before he died, along with the evidence the marshal has gathered. I never said Patrick told me anything, Sarah interrupted sharply. Daniel's gaze was knowing. Didn't he? Isn't that why you've been running all this time? Because you know something that could destroy Jericho Blackburn. Sarah stood abruptly, cradling the sleeping Thomas against her shoulder. You don't know anything about me or my reasons, she said, her voice low to avoid waking her son. And I don't know you. For all I know, this could be an elaborate trap. Daniel rose as well, his height towering over her, but he made no move to come closer. I understand your caution, Mrs. O'Malley, but I'm asking you to trust me, just as Patrick did. I promised him I would protect his family if anything happened to him, and I intend to keep that promise. Fine words, Sarah replied bitterly. But where were you 4 years ago when I buried my husband with a 4-month-old baby in my arms? Where were you when Blackburn's men burned our home and forced us to flee in the middle of the night? Pain flashed across Daniel's face. I was searching for you. Patrick's last letter only said he was working in a silver mine near Helena. By the time I tracked down which one and found out about his death, you had already left town. I've been following your trail ever since, always a few steps behind. Sarah wanted to disbelieve him, but the sincerity in his voice was hard to dismiss. Still, years of running had taught her caution. Even if what you say is true, I can't risk my son's life on the promise of justice, she said. Blackburn has judges and lawmen in his pocket across 3 territories. Not this time, Daniel insisted. This is a federal case brought by a marshal from Washington. Blackburn can't buy his way out of this one, but only if witnesses come forward. Thomas stirred in Sarah's arms, mumbling in his sleep. She looked down at her son's face, so peaceful and trusting. How many more years of running could they endure? How many more tiny rooms in strange towns, always looking over their shoulder, never putting down roots? I need time to think, she finally said. Daniel nodded. Of course. You and Thomas can take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire. Sarah hesitated. We should leave in the morning. Those men will still be searching. We're safe here for now, Daniel assured her. This place isn't on any maps, and I've covered our tracks well. Rest tonight, and we'll talk more tomorrow. Too exhausted to argue further, Sarah carried Thomas to the narrow bed and laid him down gently. She removed his small boots and covered him with the wool blanket that smelled faintly of pine and smoke, Daniel's scent. She sat on the edge of the bed, unwilling to lie down while the stranger was still moving about the cabin. Daniel busied himself stoking the fire and setting a pot of coffee to boil. The domestic normalcy of the scene was strangely comforting after the chaos of their escape. Are you certain no one followed us? Sarah asked quietly. Daniel glanced up from the fire. Yes. I've been tracking and evading men like Blackburn's hired guns for years. We weren't followed." "How do you know so much about Blackburn? About what happened to Patrick?" Daniel sighed, pouring coffee into a tin cup. He offered it to Sarah, who shook her head. He took a sip before answering. "After I couldn't find you, I started looking into Patrick's death. Asked questions around Helena, followed leads. Eventually, I connected with Federal Marshal James Harker, who had been investigating Blackburn for years. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that Patrick was murdered for what he knew." "And what did he know?" Sarah asked, watching Daniel carefully. Daniel met her gaze steadily. "I think you know the answer to that, Mrs. O'Malley. Patrick discovered that Blackburn was salting his mines, selling worthless stock to Eastern investors. But more than that, he found evidence that Blackburn had murdered his former partner when the man threatened to expose him." Sarah's breath caught. It was true, exactly what Patrick had confided to her in frantic whispers the night before he died. He had shown her papers he'd stolen from Blackburn's office, documents he'd hidden somewhere safe before coming home. "The papers," she whispered, almost to herself. Daniel's eyes sharpened. "What papers?" Sarah realized her mistake and backtracked quickly. "Nothing. Just something Patrick mentioned once." But Daniel wasn't fooled. "Mrs. O'Malley, Sarah, if Patrick left evidence, that could be the key to bringing Blackburn down. Do you know where these papers are?" Sarah stood abruptly. "I need to sleep, so does Thomas. We can discuss this in the morning." Daniel studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Of course. Rest well." Sarah lay down beside her son, keeping her back to the room. She heard Daniel moving quietly, settling himself near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was long in coming as her mind raced with memories and fears. Patrick's urgent whispers that last night, his promise that the papers would protect them if anything happened to him, his plans to speak with the federal authorities. But then had come the accident, the funeral, and Blackburn's men at her door the very next day, demanding to know where Patrick had hidden the documents. She had fled that night with her infant son, beginning 4 years of constant movement. The papers still existed, hidden where Patrick had left them. Sarah had never retrieved them, too afraid of leading Blackburn's men to the evidence. But perhaps now, with a federal marshal involved and Daniel's unexpected help, there might be a chance for justice and an end to running. With that thought, she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. Sarah woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Pale morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Thomas was still asleep beside her, his small face peaceful in repose. She sat up slowly, her muscles protesting after yesterday's long ride. Daniel was already awake, standing by the stove where a pot of something fragrant simmered. He looked up when she stirred, offering a cautious smile. "Good morning," he said quietly. "I hope you slept well." Sarah nodded, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "Well enough." She glanced down at Thomas, who showed no signs of waking. "What time is it?" "Just past 7, Daniel replied, stirring whatever was in the pot. "I've made some oatmeal if you're hungry." The mention of food reminded Sarah that they hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Her stomach growled traitorously, and Daniel's smile widened slightly. "I'll take that as a yes," he said, reaching for a bowl. Sarah slipped from the bed, straightening her rumpled dress as best she could. She accepted the bowl of oatmeal with a murmured thanks and sat at the small table. "I checked the perimeter at dawn," Daniel informed her as he poured her a cup of coffee. "No sign of anyone for miles." Sarah took a cautious sip of the coffee, strong but good. "What's your plan?" she asked bluntly. "Assuming I agree to help, which I haven't." Daniel leaned against the counter, his own bowl in hand. "Marshal Harker is gathering witnesses in Denver. If we can get you there safely, you can tell him what you know about Blackburn and Patrick's death." "And then what?" "Blackburn still has men everywhere. Even if he's arrested, his reach is long. The marshal is arranging protection for all witnesses," Daniel explained. "A new start somewhere far from here, California perhaps, or even back east." Sarah stirred her oatmeal, considering. "A new start sounds wonderful, but I've heard promises before." "This isn't just a promise," Daniel insisted, his blue eyes earnest. "This is a federal case with the full backing of Washington. Blackburn has powerful friends, but even they can't interfere with this." A small sound from the bed interrupted them. Thomas was sitting up, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Mama." Sarah set down her bowl and went to him, smoothing his tousled hair. "Good morning, my love. Did you sleep well?" Thomas nodded, his eyes widening as he took in their surroundings. Memory seemed to return as his gaze settled on Daniel. "We rode on the big horse," he said with a hint of excitement. "That's right," Sarah confirmed. "This is Mr. Thornton's house. He's a friend of your father's." Thomas regarded Daniel with renewed interest. "You knew my papa?" Daniel approached slowly, kneeling to Thomas's eye level. "I did. He was a brave man and a good friend." "Mama says I look like him," Thomas announced proudly. "You do," Daniel agreed with a gentle smile. "You have his eyes." The simple interaction made Sarah's chest tighten unexpectedly. Thomas had been so young when Patrick died that he had no real memories of his father. All he knew were the stories Sarah told him and the small daguerreotype she carried of Patrick in his Union uniform. "Are you hungry?" she asked, pushing aside the emotion. "Mr. Thornton made oatmeal." Thomas nodded eagerly, and Sarah helped him wash his hands in the basin before settling him at the table with a smaller portion of the breakfast. As they ate, Sarah observed Daniel with her son. He was patient and kind, answering Thomas's many questions about the horses and the cabin with serious consideration rather than the dismissive responses children often received from adults. Thomas, normally shy around strangers, seemed to warm to him quickly. "Can we see Copper again?" Thomas asked between bites. "I want to pet him." "Of course," Daniel replied. "After breakfast I need to check on the horses anyway. Would you like to help me?" Thomas's face lit up. "Can I, Mama?" Sarah hesitated, still wary of letting her son out of her sight, but she relented at his hopeful expression. "Yes, but stay close to Mr. Thornton and do exactly as he says." When they had finished eating, Daniel took Thomas outside to see the horses while Sarah remained behind to wash the dishes. Through the window, she watched as Daniel lifted her son onto a fence rail so he could pat Copper's nose. Thomas's delighted laugh carried through the morning air, and something inside Sarah ached at the sound. How long had it been since her son had laughed so freely? Daniel returned with Thomas after about half an hour, the boy chattering excitedly about how he had helped feed and water the horses. "You were very brave," Daniel told him seriously. "Copper doesn't let just anyone handle him, but he seems to like you." Thomas beamed at the praise. "Can I ride him again today?" "That's up to your mother," Daniel replied, glancing at Sarah. She realized that a decision couldn't be postponed any longer. "Thomas, why don't you play with your wooden horse for a while? Mr. Thornton and I need to talk." Thomas reluctantly agreed, settling in a sunny spot by the window with his treasured toy. Sarah motioned for Daniel to follow her onto the porch, where they could speak without being overheard. The morning was cool but pleasant, the mountains standing sentinel in the distance. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, both from the chill and from the weight of what she was considering. "These papers Patrick hid," Daniel began without preamble. "Do you know where they are?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, they are in Helena, hidden in the cemetery." Daniel's eyebrows rose in surprise. The cemetery. Patrick was friends with the caretaker, Sarah explained. There's a mausoleum belonging to one of the founding families. The caretaker gave Patrick a key. He hid the papers in a compartment behind one of the stone plaques. Clever, Daniel admitted. No one would think to look there. I never went back for them, Sarah continued. It was too dangerous. After the funeral, Blackburn's men watched the cemetery for weeks, hoping I'd lead them to whatever Patrick had hidden. Daniel considered this information. If we can retrieve those papers and get them to Marshal Harker along with your testimony, Blackburn won't stand a chance. Helena is nearly 100 miles from here, Sarah pointed out, and likely still watched. Not as closely after 4 years, Daniel countered. And I know ways to enter the town without being seen. I've had practice slipping past Blackburn's men. Sarah paced the length of the small porch. Even if we get the papers, even if your marshal arrests Blackburn, what guarantee do I have that Thomas will be safe? That we can stop running? Daniel stepped closer, his expression solemn. I can't promise there won't be danger. But I can promise that I will protect you both with my life if necessary. And once Blackburn is behind bars awaiting trial, the marshal's men will escort you to a safe location until it's over. Sarah studied him, searching for any sign of deceit. Why do you care so much? Is this just about a promise to a dead friend? Daniel looked away, his jaw tightening. Patrick was more than a friend. He was like a brother to me. We survived hell together during the war when I learned he'd been murdered. He trailed off, then met her gaze again. This isn't just about a promise. It's about justice. For Patrick, for you and Thomas, and for all the others Blackburn has hurt or killed over the years. The conviction in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah found herself wanting to believe him, despite years of hard-learned caution. If I agree to this, she said slowly, I need your word that Thomas's safety comes first. If at any point I feel he's in too much danger, we walk away. No arguments. You have my word, Daniel replied without hesitation. Sarah took a deep breath. Then we'll do it. We'll get the papers and go to Denver. Relief crossed Daniel's features. Thank you, Sarah. I know this isn't easy. When do we leave? Tomorrow at dawn, Daniel decided. We'll need to travel light and fast. It's about 3 days' ride to Helena if we push hard. Sarah nodded, already mentally preparing for yet another journey. But this time, for the first time in years, she was moving toward something rather than away. What do we tell Thomas? She asked. Daniel considered the question. The truth, or as much of it as he can understand. That we're going on a journey to help make things safe for both of you. Sarah agreed reluctantly. He's too young to understand all of it, but he should know this isn't just another move. They returned inside to find Thomas still playing contentedly. Sarah knelt beside him, choosing her words carefully. Thomas, Mr. Thornton, and I have been talking. Tomorrow we're going to take a journey together. The boy looked up, curiosity in his eyes. Where are we going? First to a place called Helena, Sarah explained. Your father left something important there that we need to find. Then we'll go to a big city called Denver. Will there be lots of horses? Thomas asked, his priorities clear. Sarah smiled despite her anxiety. Yes, there will be horses. But it's going to be a long ride, and sometimes we might need to be very quiet and careful. Thomas's expression turned serious. Because of the bad men. Sarah's heart twisted at his understanding. Even at 4, her son had learned to be wary, to recognize danger. Yes, because of them. But Mr. Thornton is going to help keep us safe. Thomas looked at Daniel, who had moved to stand beside them. Are you a good man? Daniel knelt down, meeting Thomas at eye level. I try to be, he answered honestly. And I promise to do everything I can to protect you and your mother. Thomas studied him with surprising intensity for a child his age, then nodded solemnly. Okay. Daniel glanced at Sarah, a silent question in his eyes. She gave a small nod. Her son's simple acceptance meant more than he could know. "Now," Daniel said, rising to his feet, "we need to prepare for our journey. Thomas, would you like to help me gather supplies for the horses?" Thomas jumped up eagerly, his wooden horse still clutched in one hand. Sarah watched as they headed back outside, Daniel shortening his stride to match the boy's small steps. She felt a curious mixture of hope and fear, hope that this might finally end their running, fear that she was putting her trust in the wrong man. But something about Daniel Thornton inspired confidence despite her caution. Perhaps it was the way he spoke of Patrick with genuine respect, or how he treated Thomas with such natural kindness. Or perhaps it was simply that, after 4 years of relying only on herself, the prospect of having an ally was too tempting to resist. Whatever the reason, Sarah found herself preparing for their journey with a strange sense of purpose. For the first time since Patrick's death, she was fighting back rather than simply surviving. And that, she realized, felt unexpectedly good. The day passed quickly in preparations. Daniel showed Sarah a map of their route, carefully explaining each leg of the journey and potential hiding places if they encountered trouble. He packed food, ammunition, and medical supplies with the efficiency of a man accustomed to life on the move. Sarah contributed what little she had: extra clothes for Thomas, the small sewing kit she always carried, and the precious daguerreotype of Patrick. She caught Daniel looking at it once, a flash of pain crossing his features before he turned away. That evening, as Thomas slept and they sat by the fire making final preparations, Sarah finally asked the question that had been on her mind all day. "What happened to you after the war, before Patrick contacted you?" Daniel looked up from the pistol he was cleaning, surprise evident in his expression. It was the first personal question she had asked. "I went home to Pennsylvania," he replied after a moment. "Found my family farm in ruins. Confederate raiders had burned it during the war. My parents had died and my younger sister had married and moved west. I drifted for a while, took work as a scout for the Army, then as a marshal's deputy in Kansas." "Is that where you were when Patrick wrote to you?" Daniel nodded. "Dodge City, not a place I care to remember." He set the pistol aside, his hands falling still. "I came west as soon as I got his letter, but I was too late. By the time I reached Helena, he'd been dead for 2 weeks. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly, "for your family and for not being there when Patrick needed you." Daniel's eyes met hers, surprise and gratitude in their blue depths. "Thank you for saying that." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Sarah found herself studying Daniel's profile: the strong jaw, the straight nose, the way the firelight caught in his hair. He was a handsome man, she realized with a start, though the thought made her uncomfortable. She had not considered any man in that way since Patrick's death. "We should get some rest," Daniel said finally, rising to his feet. "Dawn comes early." Sarah nodded and moved to the bed where Thomas slept peacefully. As she lay down beside her son, she glanced over to see Daniel spreading his bedroll near the fire. For the first time in years, she would sleep without the constant fear of being discovered. Someone else was standing watch. With that comforting thought, she closed her eyes and surrendered to exhaustion. The next 3 days passed in a blur of hard riding and cautious travel. They kept to back trails and forests where possible, avoiding the main roads where Blackburn's men might be watching. Daniel proved to be an expert guide, finding water and shelter each night with unerring accuracy. Thomas, to Sarah's relief, handled the journey well. He seemed to view it as a grand adventure, especially the parts where he got to ride with Daniel on Copper. Sarah rode the pack horse, which Daniel had assured her was gentle enough for an inexperienced rider. They spoke little during the day, saving conversation for their evening camps after Thomas had fallen asleep. It was during these quiet hours that Sarah began to truly know Daniel Thornton. She learned about his childhood on the Pennsylvania farm, his experiences during the war, and his friendship with Patrick. In turn, she shared stories of her own life, her upbringing in Boston, her marriage to Patrick, and their journey west in search of a better life. What Sarah didn't share were the details of the papers Patrick had hidden, or exactly what they contained. Some caution remained, a protective instinct honed by years of danger. On the afternoon of the third day, they crested a hill and saw Helena spread out in the valley below. The mining town had grown since Sarah had last seen it, with new buildings stretching outward from the central streets. The cemetery lay on the eastern edge, visible as a patch of ordered stillness amid the bustling life of the town. Daniel reined Copper to a halt, studying the approach. "We'll wait until dusk," he decided. "Less chance of being recognized in the fading light." Sarah nodded her agreement. They retreated to a stand of pines to wait out the remaining hours of daylight. Thomas, tired from the day's journey, fell asleep leaning against Sarah's side. As the sun began its descent, Daniel outlined his plan. "The cemetery has a back entrance near the caretaker's cottage. We'll approach from the east, through that stretch of woods. You'll need to guide us once we're inside. I don't know which mausoleum Patrick used." "The Williams family," Sarah supplied. "It's near the center, white marble with columns at the entrance." Daniel nodded. "Once we have the papers, we don't linger. We ride straight through the night if necessary to put distance between us and Helena." "And if we're seen?" Sarah asked, the fear she'd been suppressing rising to the surface. Daniel's expression was grim. "Then we ride harder, but it won't come to that if we're careful." As dusk settled over the landscape, they mounted up again. Thomas, still drowsy from his nap, rode with Sarah this time, secured to her by a makeshift sling Daniel had fashioned from a spare blanket. "Stay close," Daniel instructed as they set off, his voice barely above a whisper. "Follow exactly where I go." They approached Helena from the east as planned, avoiding the main roads in favor of a deer trail that wound through the woods. The cemetery came into view as the last light faded from the sky, a field of stone markers and monuments, pale against the darkening grass. Daniel dismounted first, helping Sarah and Thomas down before securing the horses to a low branch. "We'll go on foot from here," he whispered. "Less chance of being heard." Sarah nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it must be audible. She lifted Thomas into her arms, though he was almost too heavy for her to carry now. "Stay quiet, love," she murmured against his hair, "like a game of hide and seek." They moved through the trees to the cemetery's edge. The iron fence was low here, easy to climb over. Daniel went first, then reached back to help Sarah and Thomas across. The grass muffled their footsteps as they made their way between the rows of graves. Sarah led them toward the center, where larger monuments and family mausoleums stood. The Williams mausoleum was just as she remembered, imposing white marble with a heavy iron door. She paused before it, shifting Thomas to her other hip. "This is it," she whispered. "The key is hidden under that loose stone by the steps." Daniel knelt, feeling along the indicated spot until his fingers found the edge of a stone that moved. Beneath it was a small iron key, tarnished with age. He retrieved it and moved to the door, inserting it into the lock with careful precision. The door swung open with a low groan that seemed deafening in the silence. Daniel winced, pausing to listen for any response. When none came, he motioned for Sarah to follow him inside. The interior of the mausoleum was cool and musty. the darkness absolute until Daniel struck a match. The small flame-illuminated stone walls lined with plaques commemorating the dead. Sarah moved directly to one on the far right, third from the bottom. "This one," she said, tracing the engraved name with her fingertips. "Jonathan Williams, 1802–1857. Patrick said it's loose at the bottom edge." Daniel handed her the match and felt along the plaque's edge. With careful pressure, the stone moved slightly, revealing a hidden space behind. He reached in and withdrew a packet wrapped in oilskin and tied with twine. "Is this it?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Sarah nodded, relief flooding through her. After 4 years of running, the evidence was finally in their hands. A sudden noise outside froze them both, the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps on gravel. Daniel quickly extinguished the match, plunging them into darkness. "Someone's coming," he breathed into Sarah's ear. "Stay absolutely still." Sarah clutched Thomas tighter, feeling him tense in her arms. They pressed themselves against the wall beside the door as a beam of lantern light swept across the entrance. "Probably just kids," a gruff voice said. "They're always sneaking in here on a dare." "Check inside anyway," another voice replied. "Boss says to be thorough." Sarah's blood ran cold. These weren't casual visitors or the cemetery caretaker, these were Blackburn's men. Somehow they'd been spotted. Daniel's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing once in silent reassurance. She felt him shift, moving in front of her and Thomas as the lantern light grew brighter. He had drawn his pistol, though Sarah couldn't see it in the darkness. The iron door creaked as someone pushed it wider. The lantern beam swept into the mausoleum, illuminating the stone plaques on the opposite wall but not yet reaching their hiding place beside the door. "See anything?" called the voice from outside. "Not yet," replied the man with the lantern, taking a step inside. Daniel tensed beside Sarah, ready to spring. She closed her eyes, praying that Thomas would remain silent, that they would somehow escape this trap. Then, from somewhere in the distance, came the sound of breaking glass and shouting. The man with the lantern paused. What the hell was that? His companion called. "Sounds like trouble at the saloon," the lantern-bearer replied, already backing out of the mausoleum. "Probably that gang from Virginia City picking another fight. Should we check it out? Might as well. Nothing here but dead folks anyway." The lantern light retreated, and the sound of footsteps faded as the men hurried toward the commotion in town. Sarah released the breath she'd been holding, her legs nearly buckling with relief. "That was too close," Daniel whispered. "We need to go now while they're distracted." They slipped out of the mausoleum, Daniel pausing only long enough to replace the key in its hiding place and ensure the door was locked. They moved swiftly through the cemetery, staying low and keeping to the shadows. When they reached the fence, Daniel helped Sarah and Thomas over first, then followed. The horses waited where they had left them, undisturbed. Daniel secured the packet of papers inside his coat before helping Sarah mount with Thomas. "We ride north," he instructed, swinging onto Copper's back. "There's a line shack about 15 miles from here where we can rest for a few hours. Then we head straight for Denver." They set off at a quick pace, leaving Helena behind. The moon had risen, providing enough light to navigate the narrow trails Daniel chose. Sarah held Thomas close, his small body warm against hers despite the chill night air. After an hour of hard riding, when no sounds of pursuit had materialized, Sarah allowed herself to breathe easier. They had done it, retrieved the evidence Patrick had hidden at such cost. Now they just needed to reach Denver and Marshall Harker. The line shack Daniel had mentioned proved to be a small, abandoned structure used by cowhands during seasonal roundups. It was crude but offered shelter from the elements and a place to rest without being exposed. While Sarah settled Thomas on a makeshift bed of blankets, Daniel built a small fire in the stone fireplace. Once Thomas was asleep, Daniel carefully unwrapped the packet of papers. "May I?" he asked, looking to Sarah for permission. She nodded, moving to sit beside him near the fire. The documents inside were exactly as she remembered: ledgers showing fraudulent mining claims, records of stock sales to unsuspecting investors, and most damning of all, a letter in Blackburn's own hand ordering the removal of his former partner, Jacob Reed. "This is even more than I hoped for," Daniel said softly, leafing through the pages. "With these and your testimony, Blackburn won't just face fraud charges, he'll hang for murder." Sarah stared at the damning evidence, remembering Patrick's face the night he'd shown them to her. "He was so afraid," she whispered. "He knew what Blackburn would do if he discovered Patrick had these papers." Daniel rewrapped the documents carefully. "Your husband was a brave man. He could have destroyed these or simply walked away, but he chose to stand up for what was right." "And it cost him his life," Sarah replied, the old grief washing over her. "Left his son without a father." Daniel's hand covered hers, warm and steady, but not without a legacy. "Patrick died trying to bring a murderer to justice. When Thomas is old enough to understand, he'll be proud of his father's courage." Sarah looked at their joined hands, surprised to find she didn't want to pull away. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up the search for us, for helping us now." "I made a promise," Daniel replied simply. "Is that the only reason?" The question slipped out before Sarah could stop it. Daniel's eyes met hers, firelight reflecting in their blue depths. "No," he admitted quietly, "not anymore." The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Then Sarah gently withdrew her hand, not ready to acknowledge the feeling stirring beneath her carefully maintained armor. "We should rest while we can," she said, rising to her feet. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Daniel nodded, accepting her retreat without comment. "I'll take first watch." "You sleep." Sarah moved to lie beside Thomas, her mind too full for sleep despite her exhaustion. The danger wasn't past far from it, but for the first time in years she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond running, beyond fear. A future where Thomas could grow up in one place, attend school, make friends. A future where she might rediscover the woman she had been before grief and fear had consumed her life. And perhaps a future that included the steady, honorable man now keeping watch by the fire. The journey to Denver took 5 more days, following a circuitous route that Daniel chose to avoid main roads and towns where Blackburn might have contacts. They traveled by day and camped by night, always alert for signs of pursuit. To Sarah's relief, Thomas continued to handle the journey well. He had taken to Daniel with the natural trust of childhood, peppering him with questions about everything from horses to hunting. Daniel answered each query with patience, often using the opportunities to teach Thomas small lessons about the natural world around them. Sarah found herself watching these interactions with a mixture of gratitude and something more complicated. Daniel was kind to her son not out of obligation but genuine affection. He treated Thomas as a person in his own right, not merely a child to be humored or managed. It was how Patrick would have been as a father had he lived to see his son grow. On the 4th night, as they camped in a sheltered canyon, Sarah sat beside Daniel after Thomas had fallen asleep. The fire cast dancing shadows on the canyon walls as they shared a pot of coffee. "Tell me about the marshal," Sarah requested. "This man we're risking our lives to reach." Daniel added another small branch to the fire before answering. "James Harker is a good man, incorruptible. He was a Union officer during the war, then joined the federal marshals. He's been building the case against Blackburn for nearly 3 years. And you trust him completely with my life," Daniel confirmed. "And more importantly, with yours and Thomas's." Sarah nodded, accepting his assessment. "What happens when we reach Denver? What will be expected of me?" "You'll need to give a formal statement about what Patrick told you before he died and identify the documents," Daniel explained. "The marshal will arrange protective custody until the trial. Blackburn has too many connections to risk leaving witnesses exposed. And after the trial, if Blackburn is convicted," Daniel turned to face her fully, "that's up to you. The government will help you relocate, start fresh somewhere Blackburn's remaining associates can't find you. You could go anywhere: California, the East Coast, even Europe if you wanted." Sarah considered this. "Thomas deserves a stable home, a proper education, somewhere with other children, a community." She paused, then added softly, "I've thought about going back to Boston. My parents are gone, but I still have a sister there." Daniel nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Boston would be a good place to raise a boy. Fine schools, culture." "Yes," Sarah agreed, watching his face. "But Thomas has grown rather fond of horses and open spaces. He might find city life confining." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, hope quickly suppressed. Children adapt. He'd make new friends, discover new interests. "And what about you?" Sarah asked directly. "After Blackburn is brought to justice, what then?" Daniel stared into the fire. "I haven't thought that far ahead. For so long, finding you and Thomas, helping bring Blackburn down, that's been my purpose. And when that purpose is fulfilled," he was silent for a long moment, "I've been thinking about buying land somewhere. Montana, perhaps, or Colorado, somewhere with mountains and good water. Raise horses, a few cattle, build something lasting." The image he painted was appealing, a peaceful life rooted in the land. Sarah could picture Thomas growing up in such a place, running free under wide skies, learning the skills of ranching and horsemanship from Daniel. The thought startled her. When had she begun imagining a future that included him? "It sounds wonderful," she said finally, her voice softer than she intended. Their eyes met across the fire, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of possibilities neither was ready to name. Daniel reached for the coffee pot, breaking the moment. "We should reach Denver by midday tomorrow," he said, refilling their cups. "The marshal's office is near the courthouse, on Larimer Street." Sarah accepted the change of subject, and they spoke of practical matters until it was time to sleep. But as she lay beside Thomas that night, Sarah found herself considering choices she had not allowed herself to contemplate for years. The following day dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn morning in the Colorado Rockies. They broke camp early and set out for the final leg of their journey. By mid-morning, they could see Denver sprawled in the valley below, smoke rising from countless chimneys. "We'll approach from the west," Daniel decided. "Less traffic, and we can reach the marshal's office without passing through the busiest parts of town." Sarah nodded her agreement, adjusting Thomas in front of her on the saddle. The boy was unusually quiet this morning, perhaps sensing the importance of their destination. They descended into the outskirts of Denver shortly before noon, joining the flow of wagons and riders heading into the growing city. Sarah kept her head down, her shawl pulled forward to shadow her face. Daniel rode slightly ahead, scanning constantly for any sign of trouble. Larimer Street was one of Denver's main thoroughfares, lined with substantial brick buildings that spoke of the city's prosperity. Daniel led them to a modest structure with a federal marshal's shield displayed beside the door. He dismounted and helped Sarah and Thomas down from their horse. "Wait here a moment," he instructed, tying the horses to a hitching post. "Let me make sure Harker is in." Sarah nodded, holding Thomas's hand tightly as Daniel disappeared inside. The street around them bustled with activity: merchants, miners, ladies in fashionable dresses, businessmen in dark suits. After so many days in the wilderness, the noise and movement of the city felt overwhelming. "Mama, are we safe now?" Thomas asked, looking up at her with solemn eyes. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Almost, my love, just a little longer." Daniel reappeared in the doorway, his expression relieved. "Harker's here. Come inside, quickly." Sarah hurried Thomas up the steps and through the door. The marshal's office was plain but orderly, several desks, a gun rack, wanted posters on the walls. A tall man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard rose from behind the largest desk as they entered. "Mrs. O'Malley," he said, his voice deep and formal. "I'm Federal Marshal James Harker. I cannot express how grateful I am that you've come forward." Sarah inclined her head slightly. "Marshal, I understand you've been looking for me for some time." "4 years," Harker confirmed, "though not as diligently as Mr. Thornton here." He glanced at Daniel with approval. "You succeeded where my deputies failed." "I had personal motivation," Daniel replied simply. Harker nodded, then turned his attention to Thomas. "And this young man must be Thomas O'Malley." Thomas pressed against Sarah's skirts but maintained eye contact with the marshal. "Yes, sir," he replied in a small voice. Harker smiled, the expression softening his stern features. "You've been very brave, young man, you and your mother both." He gestured to chairs arranged before his desk. "Please sit. We have much to discuss, and I imagine you're tired from your journey." Daniel produced the packet of documents from inside his coat. Patrick O'Malley's evidence against Blackburn, exactly where he hid it 4 years ago. Harker accepted the packet reverently, examining the seal before setting it carefully on his desk. "This may be the final piece we need. Blackburn has been careful, but with these documents and Mrs. O'Malley's testimony." "Will it be enough?" Sarah asked. "Blackburn has powerful friends." "Not as many as he once did," Harker replied. "His business dealings have become increasingly desperate in recent years. Several investors have already come forward with suspicions of fraud." He leaned forward, his expression grave. "Mrs. O'Malley, I must be honest with you. Even with these documents, building a case strong enough to convict Blackburn will take time. And during that time, your safety and your son's must be our primary concern." "What do you propose?" Sarah asked, her hand finding Thomas's shoulder. "I've arranged a safe house outside the city," Harker explained. "A small ranch owned by a retired marshal and his wife. You'll stay there under guard until the trial. No one outside this office will know your location." "For how long?" The prospect of more waiting, more hiding, made Sarah's heart sink. 2 months at most," Harker assured her. "We've been building this case for years. With your evidence, we can move quickly now." Sarah glanced at Daniel, who had remained standing near the door. "And Mr. Thornton," Harker followed her gaze. "Mr. Thornton's role in this matter is technically complete, but given his personal interest in your safety, I've agreed to his request to be assigned to your protection detail." Relief washed over Sarah. The thought of facing more uncertainty without Daniel's steady presence had been more distressing than she wanted to admit. "When do we leave for this safe house?" she asked. "Immediately," Harker replied. "I've already sent 2 deputies ahead to secure the property. We'll take your statement here first, then escort you there before nightfall." The next few hours passed in a blur of formal statements and document verification. Sarah recounted everything Patrick had told her before his death. Every detail of the night Blackburn's men had come to their home, and the years of running that followed. Thomas was provided with paper and pencils in a corner of the office, carefully supervised by a young deputy who showed remarkable patience with the boy's questions. Daniel remained present throughout, occasionally clarifying points or adding details from his own investigation. His presence was a comfort. A steady anchor in the storm of memories and fears, Sarah was forced to revisit. By late afternoon, the formalities were complete. Harker sealed Sarah's statement in an official envelope and locked the documents in his office safe. "We'll leave for the safe house now," he announced. "Mrs. O'Malley, you and Thomas will ride in a covered wagon with Deputy Miller. Mr. Thornton and I will ride escort. It's about 2 hours to the ranch." As they prepared to depart, Daniel approached Sarah and Thomas. "Are you both all right?" he asked quietly. "It's been a long day." Thomas nodded sleepily, leaning against his mother's side. The excitement and stress had taken their toll on the boy. "We're fine," Sarah assured him. "Just tired. Will you be far from us during the journey?" Daniel's eyes softened at her question. "No. I'll be right beside the wagon the entire time." Sarah nodded, comforted by his promise. She had come to rely on his protection, his steadfast presence. The thought of separation, even brief, was unsettling. The journey to the safe house proceeded without incident. As promised, Daniel rode beside the wagon, occasionally checking on Sarah and Thomas through the canvas opening. Thomas fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the rhythm of the wagon wheels. The ranch was exactly as Harker had described, a modest but comfortable property nestled in the foothills west of Denver. A sturdy main house, a barn, and several outbuildings stood within a fenced perimeter. The retired marshal, introduced as Henry Wilson, and his wife Martha welcomed them with simple hospitality. "The east bedroom is prepared for you and the boy," Martha told Sarah, leading them inside. "There's hot water for washing, and I've made a stew for supper." Sarah thanked her, grateful for the kindness. Thomas was too tired for food, so she helped him wash and tucked him into the clean, comfortable bed. He was asleep again almost instantly. When Sarah returned to the main room, she found Daniel, Harker, and Wilson seated at the table discussing security arrangements. "2 deputies will rotate shifts outside," Harker was saying. "Mr. Thornton will stay in the house. No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization." Wilson nodded his understanding. "The property is visible from all sides. No one can approach without being seen." "What about supplies?" Sarah asked, joining them at the table. "I'll bring whatever you need when I check in," Harker replied, "which will be every 3 days at minimum." Martha set a bowl of stew before Sarah. "Eat, dear. You look exhausted." Sarah accepted the food gratefully, realizing how hungry she was. As she ate, the men continued their discussion of patrol routes and emergency protocols. Daniel occasionally glanced her way as if checking that she was still there, still safe. When the meal was finished, Harker rose to leave. "I'll return on Thursday with news of our progress. Until then, rest and recover from your journey. You're safe here." After the marshal departed, Wilson and Martha excused themselves to their bedroom at the far end of the house. Sarah found herself alone with Daniel for the first time since their arrival in Denver. "You should sleep," he said gently, noting the exhaustion evident in her face. "It's been a long day." "I know," Sarah agreed, but made no move to rise. "Daniel, thank you for everything, for finding us, for helping us reach Denver safely." Daniel shook his head slightly. "You don't need to thank me. I made a promise to Patrick." "Is that still the only reason?" Sarah asked, echoing her question from nights before. Daniel's gaze held hers steadily. "No," he admitted quietly. "Not for a long time now." Sarah felt her heart quicken. "Then why?" He considered his answer carefully. "Because Thomas deserves to grow up without fear. Because justice should be served for what happened to Patrick." He paused, then added softly, "And because you, Sarah O'Malley, are the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within Sarah, breaking through barriers she had maintained for years. "I was so afraid to trust you," she confessed. "After so long alone, depending only on myself, the idea of relying on someone else was terrifying." "And now?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Now I find it's equally terrifying to imagine continuing without you." Daniel turned his hand to grasp hers, his touch warm and sure. "Sarah." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. For 4 years, she had been only a mother, a fugitive, a survivor. In this moment, she remembered what it was to be simply a woman with a woman's heart and needs. "I should check on Thomas," she said softly, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. It was too soon, too raw. This fragile connection between them needed time to strengthen before she could fully surrender to it. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. Good night, Sarah." "Good night, Daniel." As she walked to the bedroom, Sarah felt lighter somehow, as if she had set down a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she was no longer facing it alone. The days at the safe house fell into a peaceful rhythm. Thomas, delighted by the space and freedom of the ranch, spent hours exploring the yard under the watchful eyes of Daniel or the deputies. Martha Wilson proved to be a warm, grandmotherly presence, teaching Thomas simple chores and baking skills in the kitchen. Sarah found herself relaxing gradually, the constant tension of 4 years slowly unwinding. She helped Martha with household tasks, read books from the Wilsons' modest library, and sometimes simply sat on the porch watching Thomas play. Daniel was a constant presence, vigilant but unobtrusive, always ensuring their safety without restricting their movements within the protected perimeter. In the evenings, after Thomas was asleep, Sarah and Daniel often sat together on the porch, talking in low voices as night settled over the ranch. It was during these quiet conversations that Sarah truly came to know the man behind the protector. She learned of his dreams for the future, the horse ranch he hoped to build, the life he envisioned far from the violence and chaos of his past. He spoke of his younger sister in Oregon, his only surviving family, and his hope to visit her once Blackburn was brought to justice. In turn, Sarah shared her own hopes to see Thomas educated, to perhaps resume teaching, which had been her profession before marriage. She spoke of her childhood in Boston, her parents, and the sister she hadn't seen in nearly 7 years. As the days passed, their conversations grew more personal, the connection between them deepening. Daniel never pressed for more than Sarah was ready to give, but his feelings were evident in every look, every gentle touch of hand to arm or shoulder. Marshal Harker visited regularly as promised, bringing supplies and updates on the case against Blackburn. The news was encouraging. Grand jury proceedings had begun, and indictments were expected within weeks. "Blackburn knows something is happening," Harker reported during his 3rd visit. "He's liquidating assets, preparing to flee if necessary, but we're watching his every move." "Has he discovered we're in Denver?" Sarah asked, the old fear flickering. "No," Harker assured her. "He knows someone has recovered Patrick's evidence, but not who or where." "You're safe here, Mrs. O'Malley." 2 weeks into their stay, as autumn deepened around them, a significant milestone arrived: Thomas's 5th birthday. Sarah had mentioned the date to Martha, who immediately began planning a small celebration. On the morning of Thomas's birthday, Sarah woke him with a kiss, and the news that there would be special surprises for him that day. The boy's eyes widened with excitement. Birthdays during their years of running had been marked only with whispered wishes and perhaps a small sweet if Sarah could afford it. Martha outdid herself with a special breakfast of hot cakes and preserves, followed by the presentation of a small gift, a wooden top she had asked her husband to carve. Thomas accepted it with wonder, immediately demanding to try it out on the wooden floor. As the day progressed, Sarah noticed Daniel's absence. He had mentioned needing to check the perimeter with the deputies, but hours passed without his return. She tried not to worry the ranch was secure, and Daniel was more than capable of handling any threat, but his absence left an unexpected emptiness. In late afternoon, as Martha was preparing a special birthday supper, the sound of hoofbeats approached the house. Sarah tensed automatically before recognizing Daniel's distinctive gait. Thomas, who had been helping set the table, ran to the window. "It's Mr. Thornton," he announced excitedly, "and he has something with him." Sarah joined her son at the window, curiosity overcoming her concern. Daniel was indeed returning, leading a small pony beside his horse. The animal was dappled gray with a black mane, just the right size for a young boy. Thomas gasped, his face illuminated with wonder. "A pony! Mama, look!" Before Sarah could respond, Thomas was out the door and running across the yard. She followed quickly, watching as her son approached the animals with reverent awe. Daniel dismounted, smiling at Thomas's reaction. "Happy birthday, Thomas," he said, kneeling to the boy's level. "Do you like him?" "Is he for me?" Thomas asked incredulously. Daniel nodded. "His name is Scout. He's gentle and patient, perfect for a beginning rider." Thomas reached out tentatively to touch the pony's soft nose. Scout whickered softly, seeming to approve of his new young friend. "Can I ride him?" Thomas asked, looking between Daniel and his mother. Sarah, still processing the magnificent gift, found herself nodding. "If Mr. Thornton says it's all right and if he helps you." Daniel lifted Thomas onto the pony's back, adjusting the small saddle he had procured. "Hold the reins like this," he instructed, showing the boy the proper grip. "Gently now, Scout will respond to the lightest touch." For the next half hour, Daniel led Thomas and Scout around the yard in slow circles, teaching the fundamentals of horsemanship with patience and encouragement. Thomas's face shone with pride and joy, his small body gradually relaxing into the rhythm of the pony's movement. Sarah watched from the porch steps, her heart so full it ached. No gift could have been more perfect for her son, not just the pony itself, but the confidence and independence it represented. Daniel had understood exactly what Thomas needed, perhaps better than she did herself. When the riding lesson ended, Daniel helped Thomas unsaddle Scout and showed him how to brush the pony down. "A good horseman always takes care of his mount first," he explained seriously, "before he sees to his own comfort." Thomas nodded solemnly, absorbing this important lesson. When the pony was settled in the barn with fresh hay and water, they returned to the house where Martha's birthday supper waited. The meal was a joyous affair, with Thomas chattering excitedly about Scout and his riding lesson. Martha had baked a small cake, a rare luxury on the frontier, and Thomas blew out the single candle with a look of pure happiness. Later, after Thomas had fallen asleep still clutching the wooden top, Sarah found Daniel on the porch. He stood leaning against a post, looking out at the starlit pasture where Scout now grazed. "You didn't have to do that," Sarah said softly, joining him. "The pony, it's too generous a gift." Daniel turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light. "I wanted to. Every boy should have something that's truly his, something that brings him joy." "Still, it must have cost, Sarah," Daniel interrupted gently. "Please don't worry about the cost. Seeing Thomas's face when he first saw Scout was worth every penny and more." Sarah studied him in the moonlight, this man who had brought safety and happiness back into their lives. "You care for him very much, don't you?" "Yes," Daniel admitted simply. "He's an extraordinary boy, smart, brave, kind, just like his mother." The compliment warmed Sarah from within. "Daniel, I need to ask you something. Anything. She took a deep breath. When this is over, when Blackburn is convicted and we're truly safe, what happens then? Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. That depends on what you want to happen, Sarah. And if I said I didn't want to go to Boston, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. If I said Thomas and I would prefer mountains and open spaces to city streets. Hope kindled in Daniel's eyes, but he spoke carefully. Then I would say there's a valley I know in northern Colorado. Good water, sheltered from winter storms, perfect for raising horses, and perhaps a family. Sarah's heart quickened at his words. A family. Daniel took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. Sarah, I need to be honest with you. I came looking for you because of a promise to Patrick, but I stayed because... He paused, gathering his courage. Because I've fallen in love with you, with both of you. The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness but from the sheer, overwhelming nature of the moment. After years of loss and fear, here was a man offering love, security, a future. Daniel, she began, her voice trembling slightly, I can't make promises yet. It's been so long since I allowed myself to think beyond survival, beyond keeping Thomas safe. I need time. I understand, he said gently. I'm not asking for promises, Sarah, just the chance to show you what life could be like for us, all of us together. Sarah reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. I'd like that, she whispered. Very much. Daniel's smile was like sunrise after a long night. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought fresh tears to her eyes. His hand came up to cradle her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear as it fell. When they parted, Sarah remained in the circle of his arms, her head resting against his chest. She could hear the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, strong and reassuring. We should go inside, Daniel murmured eventually. It's getting cold. Sarah nodded but made no move to leave the warmth of his embrace. This moment, this connection, felt too precious to end. Sarah, Daniel said softly, tilting her face up to his. We have time, all the time we need. She smiled then, truly smiled for perhaps the first time in years. Yes, she agreed. We do. Hand in hand, they returned to the house, closing the door on the night and opening it to possibilities neither had dared imagine before. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of quiet happiness. Thomas spent every possible moment with Scout, his confidence growing with each riding lesson. Daniel proved to be a patient teacher, firm but never harsh, always encouraging the boy's natural abilities. Sarah watched their relationship develop with a mixture of joy and occasional pangs of uncertainty. Thomas had never known a father's love. Patrick had died when he was only 4 months old. Now, the boy was forming a deep attachment to Daniel, looking to him for approval and guidance. If things didn't work out between them. But such thoughts seemed increasingly unlikely as her own feelings for Daniel deepened. They stole moments together when Thomas was occupied with Martha, or napping, a touch of hands as they passed in the hallway, a private smile across the dinner table, occasional kisses when they could be alone. Each day, the future they had spoken of seemed less like a dream and more like an attainable reality. Marshal Harker's visits brought increasingly positive news. The grand jury had returned indictments against Blackburn on multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and first-degree murder in the death of his former partner Jacob Reed. The evidence from Patrick's hidden documents had proven decisive. We expect to arrest Blackburn within the week, Harker reported during his visit in early November. His assets have been frozen and he's under constant surveillance. He knows the net is closing. What about Patrick's death? Sarah asked. Will he be charged with that as well? Harker's expression was compassionate but realistic. "We're still building that case, Mrs. O'Malley. The evidence is more circumstantial than with Reed's murder, but I promise you we'll pursue it to the fullest extent possible." Sarah nodded, accepting the limitations of justice. Patrick's murderer would answer for his crimes, even if not all of them could be proven in court. "How much longer will we need to remain in hiding?" she asked. "Once Blackburn is in custody, the immediate danger will be reduced," Harker explained. "But I would recommend staying here until at least the preliminary hearing. We need to ensure none of his associates attempt to interfere with witnesses." "And when might that be?" "Mid-December at the earliest," Harker replied. "The wheels of justice turn slowly, I'm afraid, even in a case of this magnitude. Another month, perhaps more." Sarah glanced out the window to where Thomas was showing Scout to the marshal's deputies, his small face animated with pride. The prospect of remaining at the ranch no longer felt like confinement. Instead, it seemed like a gift, a peaceful interlude before whatever came next. "That will be fine, Marshal," she said. "We're comfortable here." Harker nodded, a knowing look in his eyes as they flickered to Daniel, who stood nearby. "I thought you might be. Wilson and his wife have certainly taken a shine to the boy." "They've been incredibly kind," Sarah agreed, "as has Mr. Thornton." "Indeed," Harker said with a slight smile. "Mr. Thornton has proven quite devoted to your protection." Daniel cleared his throat, obviously uncomfortable with the marshal's implication. "It's my duty, sir." "Of course," Harker replied, still smiling. "Well, I'll take my leave. Expect me again in 3 days unless there are significant developments with Blackburn." After the marshal departed, Sarah found herself smiling at Daniel's evident embarrassment. "Your duty," she teased gently. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Harker is too observant for his own good." "And what has he observed?" Sarah asked, stepping closer. Daniel's eyes softened as they met hers. "That I find it increasingly difficult to maintain a professional demeanor where you're concerned, Mrs. O'Malley." "Perhaps you should stop trying," she suggested, her voice low. Daniel's hand came up to cup her cheek. "Sarah," he murmured, "you are making it very hard to remember all the reasons why I should proceed slowly." "Good," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. The kiss deepened, months of suppressed longing finding expression in the heated meeting of mouths and the tight clasp of arms. Sarah felt herself melting against him, her body remembering sensations long forgotten. The sound of the door opening broke them apart. Martha Wilson entered, a basket of laundry in her arms, and smiled knowingly at their flushed faces and guilty expressions. "Don't mind me," she said cheerfully. "Thomas is helping Henry repair the chicken coop. They'll be occupied for at least another hour." She disappeared into the back of the house, leaving Sarah and Daniel looking at each other with a mixture of embarrassment and suppressed laughter. "I feel like a schoolgirl caught behind the woodshed," Sarah admitted, smoothing her hair. Daniel chuckled, the sound warm and rich. "I haven't blushed like this since I was 16, and Mrs. Peterson caught me stealing apples from her orchard." The shared moment of humor eased the intensity between them, allowing them to step back into the comfortable companionship that had become the foundation of their relationship. "I should help Martha with the laundry," Sarah said, though she made no move to leave. Daniel nodded. "And I should check on Thomas and Henry. That chicken coop has needed repairs for weeks." Still, neither moved, their eyes locked in silent communication of all that remained unsaid between them. "Daniel," Sarah began hesitantly, "when Marshal Harker arrests Blackburn, when this is truly over—" "Yes," he prompted gently when she faltered. "I think Thomas and I would very much like to see that valley you mentioned, the one in northern Colorado." Daniel's face transformed with joy. "I'd like that too. Very much. With that simple exchange, a decision was made, not a formal commitment, but a shared intention to explore the possibility of a future together. Sarah carried the warmth of it with her as she went to help Martha, a sense of peace settling over her that had been absent for far too long. 3 days later, Marshal Harker arrived with momentous news. Jericho Blackburn had been arrested the previous evening at his Denver mansion. The charges had been read in front of multiple witnesses, and Blackburn was now secured in the federal holding facility awaiting his preliminary hearing. "It's over," Harker announced to the assembled household. The evidence was overwhelming. Even Blackburn's expensive lawyers couldn't prevent his remand into custody. Sarah sat heavily in the nearest chair, the magnitude of the moment washing over her. After 4 years of running, of looking over her shoulder, of fearing for Thomas's safety, it was finally over. Blackburn was behind bars, facing justice for his crimes. "Does this mean we're safe now?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. Harker nodded. "Reasonably so, yes. Blackburn's organization is in disarray. His associates are scrambling to distance themselves, not planning revenge. However," he added more cautiously, "I would still recommend remaining here until the preliminary hearing, just as a precaution." "When will that be?" Daniel asked, his hand coming to rest supportively on Sarah's shoulder. "December 12th, Harker replied. "Just over 3 weeks from now. After that, assuming the judge binds him over for trial as expected, you'll be free to go wherever you wish, Mrs. O'Malley." Sarah reached up to cover Daniel's hand with her own. "Thank you, Marshal, for everything you've done to bring Blackburn to justice." Harker inclined his head. "It's men like your husband who deserve the thanks, Mrs. O'Malley." Patrick O'Malley saw wrong being done and refused to look away. That kind of courage is rare. The Marshal's visit was brief, as he was needed back in Denver to oversee the case preparations. After he left, Sarah found herself standing on the porch, watching Thomas and Scout in the yard, trying to absorb the reality that their long nightmare was truly ending. Daniel joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. "How does it feel?" he asked quietly. "To know it's almost over. Unreal," Sarah admitted. "I've lived with fear for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to live without it." "You'll remember," Daniel assured her. "Both of you will." Sarah turned to face him, searching his eyes. "And you'll help us." "For as long as you want me to," he promised. The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality for Sarah. With the immediate threat removed, life at the ranch became almost idyllic. Thomas blossomed in the stable environment, growing more confident and outgoing by the day. His riding skills improved rapidly under Daniel's tutelage, and he began to express interest in other aspects of ranch work, helping Henry with the animals, learning to mend fences, even trying his hand at roping with a small lariat Daniel fashioned for him. Sarah found herself thinking of the future with growing certainty. The vague idea of returning to Boston seemed increasingly distant, replaced by visions of a life in the West, a home of their own. Perhaps the valley Daniel had described, where Thomas could grow up with Scout, and whatever other animals might join their family. Their family. The phrase appeared in her thoughts with increasing frequency, no longer causing her to pull back in fear or uncertainty. Daniel had become essential to both her and Thomas in ways she couldn't have imagined when they first met. One evening in early December, with the preliminary hearing just a week away, Sarah and Daniel walked together along the creek that bordered the Wilson property. Thomas was having a reading lesson with Martha, giving the adults a rare opportunity for private conversation. The day was crisp, but not uncomfortably cold, the winter sun casting long shadows across the frost-covered ground. Their breath formed small clouds in the air as they walked side by side, hands occasionally brushing. "I've been thinking," Daniel said after a comfortable silence, "about what happens after the hearing." Sarah glanced at him. "Oh," Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I told you about that valley in northern Colorado. I've had my eye on a particular piece of land there for nearly 2 years. 500 acres with a year-round creek, good grazing, sheltered from the worst of the winter storms." "It sounds wonderful," Sarah said softly. "I've saved enough to buy it outright," Daniel continued, "and to build a proper house, nothing fancy but solid, room enough for a family to grow." Sarah's heart quickened at the implications of his words. "Daniel." He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Sarah, I know this may seem sudden, though God knows it doesn't feel that way to me. I've known since I saw you protecting Thomas with everything you had, that you were the most remarkable woman I'd ever met." Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Daniel, please. Let me finish," he said gently. "I love you, Sarah O'Malley. I love your courage, your strength, your fierce devotion to your son. And I've grown to love Thomas as if he were my own. I want to give you both a home, a life free from fear. I want to watch Thomas grow up, teach him everything I know, see him become the man Patrick would have been proud of." He took a deep breath, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "I'm asking you to marry me, Sarah, to make a life with me, to let me be a father to Thomas, to build something lasting together." Sarah felt a tear slip down her cheek, quickly followed by another. The proposal was not unexpected. They had been moving toward this moment for weeks, but hearing the words spoken aloud, seeing the love and hope in Daniel's eyes, overwhelmed her. "I don't have a ring," Daniel admitted with a small smile. "I thought perhaps we could choose one together in Denver after the hearing." Sarah laughed softly through her tears. "Oh, Daniel, do you think I care about a ring?" His smile widened with hope. "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering immediately, Sarah reached up to frame his face with her hands. "You found us when no one else could. You protected us, cared for us, gave Thomas joy when he had known so little of it. You helped bring Patrick's murderer to justice." She paused, her eyes shining with emotion. "Yes, Daniel Thornton. Yes, I will marry you." Daniel's arms encircled her waist, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. Sarah laughed as he spun her around once before setting her gently back on the ground. When his lips found hers, the kiss was filled with promise, not just of passion, but of partnership, of a shared future bright with possibilities. "When shall we tell Thomas?" Daniel asked when they finally separated, his forehead resting against hers. "Tonight," Sarah decided. "He should know before the hearing, before any more changes come." They walked back to the house hand in hand, the December sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah felt lighter than she had in years, as if the last weights of fear and uncertainty had finally lifted from her shoulders. Thomas was sitting at the kitchen table with Martha when they returned, practicing his letters with intense concentration. He looked up at their entrance, his face brightening. "Mama, Mr. Thornton, look what I wrote." He held up his slate proudly, showing the carefully formed letters of his name. "That's wonderful, Thomas," Sarah praised, moving to kiss the top of his head. "You're becoming quite the scholar." Martha, observing the glow in Sarah's cheeks and the way Daniel stood close behind her, smiled knowingly. "I think I'll go help Henry with the evening chores," she said, rising from the table. "You three look like you have things to discuss." After Martha had gone, Sarah sat beside Thomas at the table. Daniel took the chair opposite, his expression a mixture of nervousness and joy. "Thomas," Sarah began, "Mr. Thornton and I have something important to tell you." The boy set down his slate, sensing the significance of the moment. "What is it, Mama?" Sarah glanced at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly. "Mr. Thornton has asked me to marry him," she explained, "and I've said yes." "You know what that means?" Thomas's brow furrowed in thought. "It means he would be like my papa." "Yes," Daniel confirmed, leaning forward. "It means I would be your father, Thomas. We would be a family, you, your mother, and me. We would have a home together with Scout and other horses, and you would never have to leave or be afraid again." Thomas considered this solemnly. "Would I call you Papa?" Daniel's voice was thick with emotion when he answered. "If you wanted to. Or you could call me Daniel until you're ready for something else. Whatever feels right to you." Thomas slid from his chair and walked around the table to stand before Daniel. With the directness of childhood, he asked, "Do you love my mama?" "Very much," Daniel replied without hesitation. "And do you love me too?" Daniel reached out to place his hands on the boy's shoulders. "Thomas, I love you as if you had been my son from the day you were born. Nothing would make me prouder than to be your father." Thomas nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. Then, with the natural physical affection of children, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Daniel's neck in a tight hug. Daniel's arms came around the small body, holding Thomas close. Over the boy's shoulder, his eyes met Sarah's, bright with unshed tears. In that moment, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right decision. This was what Patrick would have wanted for them, not just safety, but happiness, a family, love. "Does this mean Scout gets to come with us to our new home?" Thomas asked when he finally released Daniel from the hug. Sarah laughed, wiping away a tear. "Yes, my love. Scout will definitely come with us." "And when will we go?" "After the hearing next week," Daniel explained. "First, we need to help the marshal make sure the bad man who hurt your father goes to prison. Then we'll go to Denver for a few days to get married and buy supplies. After that, we'll head north to our new home." "Will it be ready for Christmas?" Thomas asked hopefully. Daniel and Sarah exchanged glances. Christmas was just over 3 weeks away, too soon to reach the valley and build anything substantial before winter set in fully. "We might need to spend this Christmas in town," Daniel said carefully, "but we'll be together and we'll make it special. Then in the spring, we'll build our house just the way we want it." Thomas accepted this with the resilience of childhood. "Can I help build it?" "Absolutely," Daniel assured him. "Every good house needs a foreman to oversee the work. That can be your job." Pleased with this important responsibility, Thomas returned to his seat and picked up his slate again. "I'm going to draw our new house," he announced, "with room for lots of horses." As Thomas became absorbed in his drawing, Daniel moved to sit beside Sarah, taking her hand beneath the table. "That went well," he murmured. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Better than I dared hope. He's already accepted you as family." "Children are wiser than we give them credit for," Daniel replied, watching Thomas with undisguised affection. "They know who truly cares for them." In that peaceful moment, with Thomas drawing contentedly and Daniel's warm hand clasping hers, Sarah allowed herself to believe completely in the future they were building. The past could not be changed. Patrick was gone. Those years of fear could not be undone, but ahead lay a life filled with promise, with love, with the family they were creating together. The day of the preliminary hearing dawned clear and cold, the December sun providing light but little warmth. Sarah dressed with care in her best dress, a simple navy blue wool that Martha had helped her freshen with new lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair, usually confined in a simple knot, was arranged more elegantly, and she wore the small pearl earrings that had been a wedding gift from Patrick. Thomas was subdued, sensing the importance of the day. Daniel had explained to him that they would be going to a big building in Denver where his mother would tell important men about why they had been hiding and about the papers his father had left. The boy understood, in his limited way, that this was the final step before they could begin their new life together. Marshal Harker arrived early, accompanied by 2 deputies and a closed carriage for Sarah. "The courthouse will be crowded," he explained. "Blackburn's case has attracted considerable attention. We'll bring you in through a private entrance to avoid the crowds." Daniel helped Sarah and Thomas into the carriage, then mounted Copper to ride alongside as escort. The journey into Denver was tense but uneventful, the winter landscape passing in a blur of browns and whites. The federal courthouse was an imposing stone building in the heart of Denver. As Harker had predicted, a crowd had gathered outside: journalists, curious citizens, and likely some of Blackburn's business associates, hoping to gauge the proceedings. The marshal led them to a side entrance, where they were whisked inside and taken to a private waiting room. Thomas, overwhelmed by the grand building and the seriousness of the adults, stayed close to Daniel's side. "The hearing will begin at 10 o'clock, Harker informed them. "Mrs. O'Malley, you'll be called to testify after the initial charges are read. Your testimony should take no more than an hour. Mr. Thornton, you and the boy will wait here." Daniel nodded, his hand resting protectively on Thomas's shoulder. "We'll be fine. Scout has promised Thomas a long ride this afternoon when we return to the ranch, haven't you, Thomas?" The boy nodded, momentarily distracted from the tense atmosphere by thoughts of his beloved pony. "And Daniel says I can learn to trot today, Mama." Sarah smiled, grateful for Daniel's ability to ease her son's anxiety. "That sounds wonderful, my love, and I'll be there to watch your progress." At 10 o'clock precisely, a court official appeared to escort Sarah to the courtroom. She kissed Thomas's forehead and squeezed Daniel's hand before following the man down a long corridor. The courtroom was larger than she had expected, with high ceilings and wooden benches already filled with spectators. Marshal Harker waited near the front, where a table had been prepared for the prosecution. At another table sat Jericho Blackburn, flanked by 2 expensively dressed lawyers. Sarah's step faltered as she saw Blackburn for the first time in 4 years. He was older, his once black hair now streaked with gray, but his bearing was still proud, almost arrogant. As if sensing her presence, he turned and their eyes met across the crowded room. Recognition flickered in his gaze, followed by cold hatred. Sarah lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. This man had ordered Patrick's death, had sent men to threaten her and Thomas, had forced them into years of hiding and fear. Now he would face justice for his crimes. The judge, a stern-faced man with silver hair, called the court to order. The clerk read the charges against Blackburn: multiple counts of fraud and extortion, the murder of Jacob Reed, conspiracy and obstruction of justice. When asked how he pled, Blackburn's voice was firm and contemptuous. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The prosecution presented its case first, outlining the evidence against Blackburn. Documents were submitted, including those Patrick had hidden in the mausoleum. Other witnesses preceded Sarah: former employees of Blackburn's mining company, investors who had been defrauded, the medical examiner who had reviewed Jacob Reed's death. When Sarah was finally called to testify, she approached the witness stand with steady steps. After being sworn in, she faced the courtroom with calm dignity, her voice clear as she recounted Patrick's discoveries about Blackburn's fraudulent activities, his fear upon finding evidence of Reed's murder, and his plans to contact federal authorities. "The night before his death," Sarah testified, "my husband showed me documents he had taken from Mr. Blackburn's office ledgers, correspondence, the letter ordering Mr. Reed's removal. He told me he had hidden them somewhere safe, and that if anything happened to him, they would protect us." "And did something happen to him, Mrs. O'Malley?" the prosecutor asked. "The next day he was killed in what was reported as a mining accident," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the pain of the memory. "A tunnel collapse. But Patrick had told me that morning that the tunnel he was working in had been newly shored up. There was no reason for it to collapse. What happened after your husband's death?" Sarah described the visit from Blackburn's men the day after Patrick's funeral, their thinly veiled threats, their demands to know where Patrick had hidden the documents. She recounted her flight that night with 4-month-old Thomas and the years of running that followed. "Every time we began to feel safe in a new town, Mr. Blackburn's men would appear," she explained. "We moved constantly, never staying more than a few months in any place." "How did the documents finally come into the possession of the federal authorities?" the prosecutor asked. Sarah glanced toward the back of the courtroom, where she knew Daniel was now watching, having left Thomas with Martha Wilson, who had come to the courthouse to help. "Daniel Thornton, a friend of my late husband from their service together during the war, located us in Silver Ridge, Montana. With his help, we retrieved the documents from their hiding place and brought them to Marshal Harker." Blackburn's lawyers cross-examined her aggressively, attempting to discredit her testimony by suggesting she had misunderstood Patrick's concerns or was motivated by a desire for revenge. Sarah remained composed, answering each question truthfully and without embellishment. When she was finally excused from the witness stand, Sarah felt drained but relieved. She had done what she came to do, testify to the truth of Patrick's discoveries and Blackburn's crimes. The hearing continued through the afternoon with additional witnesses and arguments from both sides. By 4 o'clock, the judge was ready to render his decision. "Having reviewed the evidence presented and heard testimony from multiple witnesses, I find that there is sufficient cause to bind the defendant over for trial on all charges," he announced. "Bail is denied due to the serious nature of the charges and the demonstrated flight risk. The defendant will remain in federal custody until trial, which is hereby set for April 15th of next year." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Blackburn's face darkened with anger, but he remained silent as his lawyers conferred urgently beside him. Sarah sat quietly, absorbing the reality that it was truly over. Blackburn would remain imprisoned until his trial, and given the strength of the evidence against him, conviction seemed all but certain. She and Thomas were finally, truly safe. As the courtroom began to empty, Daniel made his way to her side. "You were magnificent," he said softly, taking her hand. "Steady and clear, exactly what was needed." Sarah leaned against him briefly, drawing strength from his solid presence. "It's finally over." "Yes," Daniel agreed. "And now we can begin." Marshal Harker approached them, satisfaction evident in his usually stern features. "Well done, Mrs. O'Malley. Your testimony was compelling and credible, exactly what the prosecution needed." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Blackburn remains in custody while both sides prepare for trial," Harker explained. "His lawyers will likely seek delays, but the judge seems determined to proceed efficiently. As for you and Thomas, you're free to go wherever you wish. The immediate danger has passed." Sarah glanced at Daniel, a silent communication passing between them. "We'll be staying in Denver for a few days," she told the marshal. "We have some arrangements to make before heading north." Harker's eyes flickered between them, understanding dawning in his expression. "I see. Well, I wish you both every happiness. You've certainly earned it." They collected Thomas from Martha Wilson and left the courthouse through the same private entrance they had used that morning. The December afternoon was already fading toward dusk as they made their way to the hotel where Daniel had secured rooms for their stay in Denver. Thomas, tired from the long, tense day, fell asleep almost immediately after supper. Sarah tucked him into bed, then joined Daniel in the small sitting room that connected their rooms. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked as she sat beside him on the settee. Sarah considered the question. That it still doesn't seem quite real, after so long running, to know that it's truly over. She shook her head slightly. "Part of me is waiting for something to go wrong, for Blackburn to somehow escape or send more men after us." Daniel took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "That's natural after what you've been through. It will take time to truly believe you're safe." "But you are, Sarah. You and Thomas both." "I know," she said softly, "and I know that's largely because of you." "No," Daniel corrected gently. "It's because of Patrick's courage in gathering the evidence and your determination to keep it and Thomas safe all these years. I was just fortunate enough to find you and help bring it to a conclusion." Sarah turned to face him fully. "You did much more than that, Daniel Thornton. You gave us back our lives. You gave Thomas joy and security when he had known so little of either. And you gave me—" She paused, emotion tightening her throat. "You gave me hope again when I thought that part of me had died with Patrick." Daniel's eyes were bright with feeling as he lifted her hand to his lips. "Then we've given each other the same gift. Because finding you and Thomas has given my life meaning and purpose I never thought to have again." They sat together in comfortable silence as the fire burned low in the grate, each contemplating the journey that had brought them to this moment and the future that lay ahead. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. There was a marriage license to obtain, a small ceremony to arrange, supplies to purchase for their journey north, and the important task of selecting a wedding ring. Daniel insisted on buying Sarah a simple but elegant gold band with a small diamond, despite her protests that it was unnecessary. "Indulge me in this, Sarah," he had said as they stood in the jeweler's shop. "I want to see this on your hand and know that you chose to share your life with me." How could she argue with such sentiment? Sarah had relented, allowing him this traditional gesture while insisting that their other purchases be practical items needed for their new home. They were married on December 15th in a small chapel near the hotel, with Thomas standing proudly beside them, Marshall Harker serving as witness, and the Wilsons attending as honored guests. Sarah wore a new dress of deep burgundy wool, and Daniel a new black suit that made his blue eyes even more striking by contrast. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, both of them speaking their vows with clear voices and unwavering conviction. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, mindful of their young audience but leaving no doubt of his feelings. Afterward, they shared a celebratory meal at the finest restaurant in Denver, Thomas on his best behavior in honor of the special occasion. Marshall Harker raised a toast to their happiness, and Martha Wilson wiped away sentimental tears as she declared they were meant for each other, plain as day. That night, after Thomas had been tucked into bed in what was now Daniel's room, Sarah waited nervously in her chamber. She had changed into a new nightgown of fine cotton trimmed with lace, another indulgence Daniel had insisted upon during their shopping expeditions. When he knocked softly and entered at her invitation, Sarah felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with lingering shyness. It had been so long since she had been with a man, and while she did not doubt her feelings for Daniel, this final step into intimacy represented a significant threshold. Daniel seemed to understand her hesitation. He approached slowly, still in his shirt and trousers though he had removed his jacket and tie. "We can wait if you're not ready, Sarah," he said softly. "Being your husband means more to me than just this night." His consideration touched her deeply. "No," she replied, finding her voice. "I don't want to wait, it's been a long time." Daniel smiled, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "For me as well. We'll find our way together as we have with everything else." His kiss was tender at first, then deepening as Sarah responded with increasing confidence. His hands were gentle as they explored, learning the contours of her body through the thin cotton of her nightgown. When he finally lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed, Sarah felt not fear but a profound sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. Later, as they lay entwined in the quiet darkness, Sarah rested her head on Daniel's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, occasionally pausing to twist a strand of her hair. "What are you thinking?" he murmured, echoing her question from days before. Sarah smiled against his skin. "That I'm happy, truly, deeply happy." She felt his kiss on the top of her head. "As am I, Mrs. Thornton. As am I." They left Denver 2 days later, their wagon loaded with supplies for the journey north and the beginnings of their new home. Thomas rode proudly on Scout, tethered to the wagon but allowing the boy the independence he craved. Daniel drove the team with Sarah beside him on the bench, a wide-brimmed hat protecting her from the winter sun. The valley Daniel had described lived up to his promises, sheltered by mountains on 3 sides, with a clear creek running through its center and ample grazing for horses and cattle. They arrived 4 days before Christmas, setting up a temporary camp in the protection of a rock outcropping while Daniel and a hired hand from the nearest settlement began work on a basic shelter. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the temporary canvas shelter warmed by a small iron stove. Sarah woke to find Daniel already up, adding wood to the fire. Thomas still slept peacefully in his bedroll, exhausted from the previous day's explorations of their new land. "Merry Christmas," Daniel whispered, returning to their shared blankets and gathering Sarah into his arms. "Merry Christmas," she replied, snuggling against his warmth. "Our first as a family." "The first of many," he promised, kissing her softly. Thomas woke soon after, his excitement over Christmas overcoming his usual reluctance to leave the warmth of his bedroll. Sarah had managed to hide a few small gifts in the wagon, a new hat for Thomas, warm gloves, and a carved wooden horse that Daniel had secretly purchased in Denver. Daniel's gift to Sarah was a surprise, a small framed photograph of the 3 of them taken in a Denver studio before their departure. "So we'll always remember how our family began," he explained as she unwrapped it. Sarah's gift to Daniel was equally meaningful, a pocket watch that had belonged to Patrick, the only valuable she had kept through all their years of running. "He would want you to have it," she said simply as Daniel examined it with reverent hands. They spent the day together exploring their new land, Daniel pointing out where the house would stand, where the barn and corral would be built, the fields where horses would graze. Thomas rode Scout through the meadow, his laughter carrying on the clear winter air. That evening, as they sat by the fire in their temporary shelter, Thomas nestled between them wrapped in a warm blanket. Sarah felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it?" Daniel asked, noticing her emotion. Sarah shook her head slightly, smiling through her tears. "Just thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, Thomas and I were alone, running from town to town, always afraid. And now?" "And now?" Daniel prompted gently. Sarah looked at her son, already drowsy against Daniel's side, then up at the man who had become her husband, her partner, her home. "Now we're exactly where we're meant to be." Daniel reached across Thomas to take her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. "Yes," he agreed softly, "we are." As winter gave way to spring, Their homestead took shape, first a solid cabin to replace the temporary shelter, then a barn and corral for the horses Daniel began to acquire. By summer, they had added a vegetable garden, chickens, and the beginnings of what would eventually become a successful horse breeding operation. Thomas thrived in their new life, growing strong and confident under Daniel's guidance. He started lessons with Sarah each morning, learning to read and write and calculate with enthusiasm, then spent his afternoons helping Daniel with the horses or exploring the valley under careful supervision. Sarah found unexpected fulfillment in creating their home and supporting Daniel's growing business. She kept the books, corresponded with potential buyers, and gradually began to offer reading and writing lessons to children from neighboring homesteads who had no access to formal schooling. Word spread about Daniel Thornton's eye for good horseflesh and fair dealing, bringing customers from as far as Denver and Cheyenne. By the fall of their first year, they had expanded the original cabin into a proper house with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a sitting room where Sarah taught her growing number of students. News reached them in April that Jericho Blackburn had been convicted on all counts and sentenced to hang. Sarah received the information with quiet relief rather than satisfaction. Justice had been served, but no punishment could bring Patrick back or restore the years of peace that had been stolen from them. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked that night after Thomas was asleep, finding Sarah sitting alone on the porch, staring at the stars. "Yes," she said, making room for him on the bench. "I was just thinking about Patrick, wishing he could see Thomas now so happy, so secure, wishing he could know that his courage wasn't in vain." Daniel put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "I believe he does know," he said quietly. "And I believe he would be proud of the boy Thomas is becoming, and the mother who protected him through so much." Sarah leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, grateful beyond words for his understanding. There was room in her heart for both men, the one who had given her Thomas and whose memory she would always honor, and the one who had given them a future, a home, a family. The following spring brought a new blessing, the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth Rose Thornton, named for both their mothers. Thomas, now 7, approached his role as big brother with solemn responsibility, proudly helping Daniel build a cradle and assisting Sarah whenever he was allowed. As Sarah nursed Elizabeth on the porch one warm summer evening, watching Daniel and Thomas working with a new foal in the corral, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From fear to safety, from running to putting down roots, from loneliness to the rich tapestry of family life, it had been a path of both hardship and unexpected joy. Daniel looked up from the corral, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, still capable of quickening her heart after nearly 2 years of marriage, held all the love and promise that had sustained them through difficult times and continued to light their way forward. Thomas, following Daniel's gaze, waved enthusiastically to his mother and baby sister. Sarah waved back, her heart full to overflowing. This was what Patrick's sacrifice had made possible, not just justice, but a legacy of love and family that would continue through their children and beyond. Daniel said something to Thomas, then left the boy carefully holding the foal's lead rope while he crossed the yard to join Sarah on the porch. He sat beside her, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand gently touching Elizabeth's downy head as she nursed. "Happy?" he asked softly, his blue eyes warm with love. Sarah leaned into his embrace, their daughter cradled between them, their son visible in the golden light of the setting sun. "Completely," she replied, and knew it was the simple truth. Years before, in a dusty alley in a frontier town, a frightened woman had tried to hide her child from danger. A man had found them, taken a small hand in his, and with actions more than words, declared that both mother and child belonged with him not as possessions, but as family, as the missing pieces of his heart. That moment had been a beginning, though none of them could have known it then. A beginning that had led them here, to this house, this land, this life built with love and determination. A life no longer defined by running or fear, but by belonging, by home, by the enduring bonds of family. As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah O'Malley Thornton offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought them home and for the man beside her who had made it possible.